Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, the next in our HR advice series, which is all about real scenarios and real advice. So I'm joined by some of our HR advice team on hand today. First of all, just going to do some housekeeping. So first of all, you'll notice that your microphone has been placed on mute, just in case you haven't joined one of these sessions before. That just means you can't speak to us directly. However, your questions are welcome today and we will try and answer as many as possible. To submit your questions, please do use the questions panel. That's the icon that looks like a speech bubble with the question mark in the middle. We also have a handout for today's session, so if you want to take a copy of the handouts there, that is the icon that looks like a document with the folded corner, and that will give you access to all of the slides that we're going to be covering in today's session. As always, you can switch to full screen if you want to see everything in more detail, and after today's session there will be a follow-up email. So first of all, my name's Jackie. I work here at Sage. I'm a learning facilitator and I'm going to be the host for today, but I am joined by Advisor Plus HR Technical Consultant Kelly Armitage and also Senior HR Advisor Denise Molyneux. And they're going to share their expertise on managing complex HR case scenarios today. So first of all, we'll just pass over to you, Kelly.
Hi, my name's Kelly. I've worked in HR for nearly 20 years, working mainly for large corporate organisations, including chemical industry, security, criminal justice and transport sectors. I've completed my level 3 and 7 CIPD qualifications, and I've worked for Advisor Plus for 11 years. My role as a HR technical consultant means I get to work closely with the clients and the advisory team, as well as having the opportunity to work on a variety of HR consultancy projects. I have experience working on complex HR topics such as grievance, disciplinary, managing underperformance, and many others. Denise, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name's Denise. I've worked in HR for 10 years. I'm a team coach at Advisor Plus, supporting a team of advisors to provide a HR service to the Sage client. I've experienced dealing with various different HR topics, such as performance capability, grievance, high-risk disciplinary cases, and flexible working. I support the team and the advice line to provide guidance to managers dealing with difficult HR issues within their business.
Okay, thank you. So in good hands today. So let's just quickly look at what we're going to be covering. So we look at real employee relations advice based on real cases that both Kelly and Denise have experienced. We'll look at what can make cases complex and risky and what we're still learning about. So factors such as neurodiversity in case management as well. As I mentioned, we'll make sure at the end of the webinar that you can access the slides that we're going to be using throughout today, and we will share the webinar recording as well so that you can watch this back on demand and you can share the links with your colleagues, your friends, and also so you can access the links to the portal of the policies and any areas that you need to pay particular attention to. And we'll share more information on how to access these at the end of the session today. So let's make a start. So first of all, Kelly, when we're talking about employee relations cases, this could cover a range of topics. So looking at disciplinary, grievance, sickness and appeals.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a range of topics employee relations or ER covers, and sometimes complexity comes from unexpected case topics such as short-term sickness management or even flexible working. So we've talked on previous webinars about the Equality Act 2010 and discrimination and those protected characteristics that are covered, such as age, gender, race and disability, and they could all be relevant in all case types. And this is where the added risks do come in. So I think one of the first points to make is that no one employee relations case is the same. Even as experienced HR professionals, we sometimes have to talk through a case with one another. And no matter how many unusual scenarios you've dealt with, there'll always be something new or complex in a different way. So I'd say seek advice or use another trusted colleague as a sounding board if you do have a complex case that you need to deal with.
So Kelly, what typically can make a case more complex?
So often, as I've referenced, it will be what we call a protected characteristic, which are characteristics through which discrimination can occur. So these are age, which is any particular age, gender reassignment, so those who are proposing to undergo, is undergoing, or has undergone a process, either in full or in part, of reassigning their sex by changing psychological or other attributes of sex. So also being married or in a civil partnership, being pregnant or on maternity leave. There's also disability. So just to note that an employee does not need a formal diagnosis to be considered disabled. If they have a physical or a mental condition which has a substantial and a long-term impact on their ability to do normal day-to-day activities, they may be considered disabled under the Equality Act 2010. So when we talk about long term, that generally means 12 months, but that can be something that's already affected them for 12 months or is likely to affect them for the next 12 months. Other protected characteristics are race, and that includes colour, nationality, ethnic or national origin, religion or belief, and that's to any religion or a lack of religion, and then the sex and sexual orientation. So we're learning more all the time through employment tribunal decisions about how these apply and how discrimination can take place. For instance, since COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen that long COVID may be classed as a disability and that menopause symptoms could be too. There was a case in the last year that found that comments about baldness could be harassment on the basis of sex. And whilst baldness can affect women, it's more likely to be something that men experience. So often it's those areas that we're still learning about that makes the case more complex.
Fab, thanks Kelly. So just with this in mind, we're also learning more about neurodivergence and how this can impact risk levels on cases. So we've seen an increase in these types of cases coming through on the advice line, with managers wanting to understand how best to support an employee, but also taking into consideration how adjustments could impact the business and service levels. So first up, I'd like to talk to you about a case regarding conduct and performance concerns relating to a neurodivergent employee. So this particular employee had been with the business for over 10 years and therefore well established in their role. There have been several conduct and performance issues that have been addressed by the travel company, which always resulted in an informal outcome or a low-level sanction, which in turn expired and left the manager feeling like they were going round and round in circles and trying to manage this particular employee. So the employee was in a safety critical management role and therefore responsible for a team of employees and customers. So they had alluded to the fact that they believed that they were struggling with bipolar and ADHD, but had never received a formal diagnosis from a medical professional. So the manager raised the case. They had concerns with the safety of the customers and the colleagues due to the employee's behaviour, but they were unsure on how best to handle the situation, given the employee raised that they had a history of mental health problems and there was a lot of conduct concerns going on in the background. So as Kelly explained earlier, being neurodivergent would be covered under the Equality Act 2010. An employee should not be discriminated against due to a disability. If they are discriminated against due to their condition, the risk of ET and the cost of the business could be significantly higher. So initially, it was important to establish the facts and whether the employee had a diagnosis or not. Many businesses will have access to medical professionals who can complete an assessment tailored to the condition, or an occupational health specialist who will complete an assessment and provide a report. The report will often detail adjustments for the business to consider, how to support the employee in their role moving forward. So in the first instance, we guided the manager to take an informal approach, which included a thorough investigation of the conduct and performance concerns. This approach also gave the manager the opportunity to explore the condition the employee raised as mitigation and put in place the appropriate action to gain the medical evidence required to make an informed decision. So the business on this occasion was able to put in place the adjustments for the employee, such as only travelling with certain colleagues, additional breaks, rest days between shifts, amended shift patterns, regular reviews and medical assessments. There was also an option to take time out when they felt overwhelmed, and the opportunity to raise in advance if they felt that they were not fit enough to attend work due to their condition. So it was really important for the managers to have a clear record and an audit trail of the conversations, including the support and the adjustments that have been put in place during the process that we supported them with. The manager also highlighted the concerns raised in relation to the employee's behaviour and the responsibility they had in the safety critical role. The employee acknowledged their responsibility and accountability for ensuring that they were fit for work with the adjustments agreed between themselves and the manager. So following the support and regular reviews with management, colleagues raised some further conduct concerns around the employee's behaviour. There was evidence of inappropriate conduct towards colleagues and customers which impacted service levels. The team also felt vulnerable in their role as they didn't feel that they could go to their manager for support due to the reaction and the comments they would sometimes receive. There were also several witness statements which supported the allegations raised by those other colleagues. So the case was managed carefully to ensure that there were no elements of discrimination in relation to the mental health condition. It was essential the case was managed sensitively and accurately from the start to ensure there were no gaps or errors with regards to the support and the communication between the employee and the business. Unfortunately, after a period of time, the business could demonstrate the support and adjustments had been in place for the employee, and unfortunately these were all exhausted and the employee was dismissed due to further conduct concerns. So a robust disciplinary process was followed in line with ACAS and additional support was offered. The business did discuss alternative roles with the employee that were not in a safety critical role as another option to support them during the process, but this was not something the employee wanted to explore any further. So the level of risk around this case was minimised due to the actions by the business to ensure the right support was implemented and that a fair process was followed. Therefore, the business could demonstrate that the employee had not been discriminated against due to their condition.
Thank you for that, Denise. And it is a really interesting case. And I think that touches on a question that we did have prior to the session, just around keeping that audit trail of any conversations and communications that have been made there. Just out of interest, in terms of neurodivergence, what could an employment tribunal claim look like if there was evidence of discrimination against a neurodivergent employee?
Okay, so it's a good question. So the cost does vary quite widely, but typically it could range from anything between 5,000 to 20,000 in legal fees. For more complex cases, it could be in excess of 50,000. So I'd like to go into a little bit more detail around what discrimination looks like, depending on the nature of the case, and an ET could find in favour of the employee and uphold claims of discrimination. So things that you need to consider, or managers need to consider when they're supporting with cases, we've got examples of direct discrimination. So this is if an employee is being treated less favourable because of their disability. For example, if they're not offered a role because they're neurodivergent. Another example of discrimination could be indirect discrimination. This can be a bit of a tricky one to get your head around. So an example of this might be if there's a policy in place or a process in place for everybody, but the effects of this disadvantages a particular group of people. So for example, setting specific rest times for each employee that cannot be flexed. So employees with ADHD may benefit from regular breaks, and having a policy that does not allow employees to choose when they go for a break may inadvertently affect employees with this type of disability. So this is not to say that people who have ADHD are necessarily entitled to more breaks than anybody else, although it may be considered a reasonable adjustment for you to consider. But by not allowing employees to choose their break time, this may affect employees with ADHD more than those employees who are neurotypical. Another example of discrimination could be discrimination arising from a disability. So this could be an employee not receiving a bonus due to absence triggers being breached because of their disability. Another discrimination to take into account would be failure to make reasonable adjustments. So an example of this might be not allowing an employee to sit in a quiet area of the office, or as mentioned earlier, having additional breaks if they have a condition such as autism or ADHD.
Lovely. Following on from Denise's case and still sticking on the theme of mental health, I'm aware of another case where an employee claimed their behaviour was as a result of their mental ill health. So the employee had been off on long-term sick with anxiety and depression and had been in hospital for some of this time. The employee sent several sexually explicit photos to a colleague unprompted. Then a few minutes later sent messages apologising profusely, saying how inappropriate it was of them to have sent them. The employer knew it was gross misconduct, and the colleague who was sent the pictures was offended and was quite distressed and felt that they couldn't work with that person again. But they didn't want to go to the police as they knew that the person was unwell and could see that they regretted what they had done. The employee who had sent the photos claimed that their mental health condition and medication had severely impacted their judgment. This and the fact that the employee had recently been in hospital prompted concerns that to dismiss them could be disability discrimination. A referral to OH was made and specific questions were asked, including were there any reasonable adjustments that would enable them to attend meetings, and any information about potential side effects from the medication and whether that and their mental ill health could significantly impair judgment about inappropriate behaviour. So occupational health met with the individual and confirmed that it would be beneficial for the investigation and any subsequent formal processes to be concluded whilst they're off sick, as prolonging it could cause further stress. They confirmed that the individual was well enough to attend meetings and was able to answer soundly. They also recommended some adjustments to allow the individual to be accompanied by a family member in the meeting and to hold it late morning, as this is when the colleague felt at their best. Crucially, though, occupational health also advised that whilst the individual was clearly unwell, their condition or their medication would not impact them sufficiently to not be able to understand right from wrong. So in this case, we consider the fact that the colleague had immediately apologised and had acknowledged how inappropriate it had been of them to send the photos. And we concluded that this, along with the OH advice, meant that they were able to make a judgment about appropriateness, and therefore their health condition and medication did not mitigate the gross misconduct, and they were subsequently dismissed at a disciplinary.
Thank you for that. So Kelly, as a HR technical consultant, what would you be looking at in terms of risk for this case, and were there any learnings from that case for you?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a risk of disability discrimination in that the employee was dismissed as a result of actions that resulted from their mental health, which due to the day-to-day impact and duration would have been considered a disability. But there has to be an assessment of whether or not it's reasonable to believe that someone ought to have known, but did it anyway for whatever reason. And to base this assessment on facts such as medical information, the employee in this case had said that they were feeling really low and unseen and wanted to get a reaction. It was important, however, to take care to avoid reference and attention seeking, as that would have been an assumption. Positioning was really key in this case on how the reasons for the dismissal was communicated, and the outcome letter had to be very factual and explain how reasonable belief had been formed that the employee was aware that their actions were inappropriate.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Kelly. So I'm going to move on now. I'm going to move on to a different subject, and it's something we have seen a number of high-profile cases in the news about recently, which is sexual harassment. So this is a topic we did a dedicated session on back in September. We do have a recording available for that. But have either of you experienced any cases of this nature recently?
Yeah, so I've got one to talk about. Thanks, Jackie. So unfortunately, we often see sexual harassment cases coming through to the advisors and class these types of cases as high risk due to the sensitive nature, and if not handled correctly, the possibility of an ET claim. So there's been a spike in cases and inquiries following the recent employment law updates last year. So for anyone that's not aware of these changes, on the 26th of October 2024, there was an amendment to legislation in relation to the Equality Act. So this legislation requires the employers to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. So there's further information around this topic on the Sage HR portal or on ACAS if anyone does want to have a little look at that in a bit more detail to gather some more information. So with regards to specific examples, I've recently supported a manager dealing with a sexual harassment case in relation to a senior manager. So within their team, managers can often find these types of cases involving senior managers quite daunting and overwhelming. So on review of the case and talking through the allegations with the manager, it was apparent that consuming alcohol whilst travelling with work had become part of business culture. So boundaries have been blurred and a lack of specifics in the business policies, updates and communication allowed this behaviour to continue, and it seemed harmless and part of the culture amongst different teams. So on this occasion, there had been alcohol consumed during an overnight stay due to work arrangements. During this time, the allegations of sexual harassment were raised from a more junior member of the team against a senior member of the team. So we guided the manager through the disciplinary process, and evidence was presented in the form of witness statements, CCTV and text messages. As a result of the findings, unfortunately, the senior manager was dismissed from the business. Mitigation was raised from the senior manager in relation to alcohol consumption, employee behaviour, business culture being the norm almost, and how the business had promoted a relaxed environment whilst working away from the office premises. So the manager dealing with this case had to consider consistency in the business with regards to previous sexual harassment cases. And although the manager was senior, all employees should be treated equally. The business did have to explore further allegations raised against other managers on separate occasions, which demonstrated that there was an issue with team culture and behaviour whilst travelling with work. It was apparent that the behaviour could not be tolerated and therefore policy reviews were completed in line with new legislation. Further communication was sent out to the teams in relation to the expectations, behaviours within the office and when travelling with work as well. This case is a good example of how changes in the business culture had not been addressed and therefore allowed to breed amongst new starters and existing staff. This then resulted in a lack of boundaries and inappropriate behaviour. It was also clear from the case that whilst one employee may perceive certain behaviour as banter and not offensive, not everyone feels the same, and therefore all employees should be protected. A major learning from this case was really that regular reviews should take place over time as the business grows and develops to stay in line with employment law. Another big takeaway for the manager was to be clear with communication to all team members, and whilst creating a great place to work, respect and empathy for all the employees must be considered.
Absolutely, that's some really good advice, and thank you for sharing that, Denise. It is really useful insight into culture, banter, and the impact that this can have on the team. What about you, Kelly?
Yeah, culture in the workplace is really important as it does demonstrate companies' values and sets out the associated expectation on behaviours. We've seen many cases where office banter becomes a problem for the employer. So some employees may take a joke too far or say something completely inappropriate and then put it down to banter. The risk of this so-called banter could be that grievances are raised for bullying and harassment in some of the more serious cases. So there can be a range of different team dynamics that can contribute to the problem, such as mostly male organisations and females then joining the team. Many years ago, it may once have been acceptable to make crude or suggestive jokes when it was all male colleagues that have worked together for many years, and then a new female joins the team. The once acceptable banter may become a problem for the business when the female understandably feels uncomfortable with those types of jokes being made. We've seen other cases where new members of the teams join and it's seen as banter to play practical jokes on that new person, or they're completely left out of the conversation. One case for me stands out where an employee was treating a fairly new member of the team in a rude and sometimes threatening way, and this went on for an extended period of time until that colleague felt that they couldn't accept it anymore and raised it to management. So the employee was making rude and nasty comments about the other employees' clothing and generally making them feel unwelcome. When this was investigated, the employee admitted to being rude and aggressive towards their colleague and initially tried to mitigate it with issues that were going on in their personal life. They also said most of the comments that were made were general banter, and that's how they've always been. So the HERA manager considered the issues in their personal life and if these had been raised to the line manager for support. They also acknowledged that the employee had thought it was banter, but that behaviour did not align with the company's values. And by behaving in this way, they had created a negative working environment for the new employee. So despite the employee stating they've always behaved in this way, there'd never been any other complaints raised of this nature. The employee did have a long, clean service record. So taking this into consideration and the fact that the other employee only wanted an apology and for the behaviour to stop, the outcome in this case was a final written warning, given the employee accepted the behaviour was inappropriate and had already agreed to apologise prior to the outcome being decided. So like all other ER cases, when considering an appropriate outcome, you should be considering not only if the allegation is upheld, but other factors such as any mitigation that's been raised, any precedent, length of service, and if there'd been any previous instances of a similar nature. Did the employee admit to the allegation or did they try to deny it? Did they show any remorse? Are they confident that they have learnt from this and would not do it again? Sorry, are you confident? How serious is the allegation? And can you protect other employees from this happening again?
Okay, so some really complex cases there, thank you both. So with this in mind, Denise, is there any steer when handling a case that can start off as pretty straightforward, but then can actually become more complex?
Yeah, so I think something that really stands out for me is when you have a case that feels straightforward from the start and then it can grow arms and legs as time goes on and the case progresses. So as we said earlier, complexity can fall in all case topics. For example, a short-term sickness case could be very policy driven at the start, following simple steps to support the employee back into the business. Following on from there, there have been occasions when a manager can't get in contact with an employee. These types of cases can escalate quite quickly if there's been a concern for the employee's welfare and the manager just can't get hold of them or reach them. So I think it can sometimes feel quite overwhelming for a manager that does have a duty of care for that employee to know how best to deal with the situation when an employee is struggling with their mental health and they're not maintaining contact. So there's been occasions where managers want to take next steps and they understand that they have a personal investment in that particular employee, but they also understand the boundary of a professional working relationship. So managers can sometimes feel reluctant to call an emergency contact or feel out of the depth when it comes to what to do next when they have a genuine concern for an employee's safety. Our advice would always be to reach out to the employee or their next of kin where possible. So in addition to this, my advice to a manager in this situation is that they can go to the employee's home, ideally with another colleague so they're not on their own, to check the employee is safe and well, or they can call the local police to complete a home check as well if they are really concerned. So it's essential that all employee personal details and next of kin details are accessible and up to date regularly in case of a situation like this, or if it occurs, I have to speak to different managers and we might advise them to reach out to do a next of kin call and they don't have the contact details. So these cases don't really happen often, but it's always good to be prepared and to have contact numbers, names and addresses on hand and stored securely for managers to access if they do need to.
Excellent, thank you. Some really good tips there. So it's time for me to change the topic again. We've got so much to squeeze in today. So next we're actually going to look at drugs and alcohol in the workplace. So over to you, Kelly.
Thank you. Yeah, so some organisations carry out drug and alcohol testing for their employees due to the nature of their business. So we've seen many examples where employees choose to use over-the-counter vitamins and supplements without researching the ingredients. So for example, we've seen employees failing a drug test due to taking slimmer medications that they purchased online and were surprised to discover that an active ingredient was amphetamine. CBD oil is another product that's becoming increasingly popular and can be found in many forms such as creams, bath salts, vaping oils, vitamins, drinks and many others. Unless these are purchased by a reputable supplier, you may not know or question what the key ingredients are that are contained within that product. Some CBD oil products may contain high levels of THC, which can result in a positive drug test. We've seen many cases of failed drugs test and the employee's mitigation being that they were unaware of what was contained in the product as it was legally purchased. So our advice is if your business does conduct DNA tests, it is recommended that all employees are informed of their responsibility to research any products that they're taking to ensure that this would not have any undue side effects on them physically, but also may affect any potential medical tests. Ideally, this would be made explicitly clear within any policies and also advised as part of their onboarding discussion as well. So whilst a failed drugs test may be a lawful dismissal, an employer would be expected to demonstrate that they acted reasonably in making that decision. There have been ET cases where employees have made a successful claim for unfair dismissal. So a failed drugs test should not be the only considered factor when deciding to dismiss. An employer should consider things like what happened, so how did it come to light that they were under the influence? What type of work is undertaken? Are they in a safety critical work, or are they not? Is there a risk to others in them working whilst taking that medication and potentially being under the influence? Have they brought the company into disrepute? And were they aware of the substance that they were taking, or could they have reasonably been expected to know? Ultimately, a tribunal will consider the merits of the dismissal, but having a robust statement on expectations will counter any mitigation from employees who states that they weren't aware of what they were taking.
Okay, so to conclude, Denise, what can employers do to manage risk in cases?
So it's a good question. So it's important to ensure that the business has well-written policies and procedures, and that these should be freely available for employees to access. Ensure training and refresher training is delivered and codes of conduct are understood, and there is effective and open communication. It's also really important to ensure employees have a confidential disclose opportunities should they need it. Another top tip is to know your employees, hold regular one-to-ones, so you know what makes them tick and you know what's going on with them personally, as well as the best way to communicate with them. So a lot of the issues we've looked at are related to communicating expectations in relation to what is and what's not appropriate. So it's essential to give real clarity to the employees about the expectations you have for them, so there's less room for misunderstanding or any kind of interpretation.
Excellent, thank you very much. So that's some great advice. Thank you very much, Denise and Kelly, for sharing your thoughts and also your experiences with us. It's been really useful already. It's time to move on now to the Q&A. So we're going to go through some of the questions that have already been submitted. If you do have a question, now is your opportunity to get your question across to us. We will try and answer as many as we can. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer all of them live on the session today. However, we will try and follow up on any submitted questions after today's session. So please do check out your mailbox after today's session if it's not responded to. Okay, so let's move on to the first question there. So the first one is, you referenced that an employee does not need a formal diagnosis to be considered disabled. Are you allowed to ask the employee if they consider themselves disabled and can still be held against the company if they did not inform them that they have a disability?
Yeah, I'll pick that one up. So by law, you can only ask an employee if they have a disability if you have a specific reason to ask. So for example, to help you decide if the employee can carry out a specific task that's essential to their role. The employee, however, is not under any obligation to tell you if they do have a disability or not, and many people choose not to disclose medical conditions out of fear that it will somehow be held against them. So when considering if an employee or a candidate is disabled, it's advised that you wouldn't ask that question directly, but instead asked for, in the case of an applicant, ask the applicant if they require any reasonable adjustments to support them as part of the recruitment process, or for an employee, for example, who's appeared to be struggling with certain tasks, you can ask if there's anything that they feel may be contributing to their underperformance that they'd like to share with you to allow you to take into consideration and look at any possible adjustments or any other support that you can put in place. So a tribunal would not only consider if the employer knew that the employee had a disability, i.e. they chose to disclose this, but also if the employer could have reasonably been expected to know. This is also known as constructive knowledge. Sometimes there may be signs the employee has a disability, and others it may not be so clear. So for people who are neurodiverse or employees who have been struggling with their mental well-being, that might not be overly obvious that they have a disability. However, employees are more inclined to disclose a disability to their employer when they feel that they work for a business that has an inclusive culture, that openly supports people by making reasonable adjustments when needed, and those employers also have a diverse workforce. Ultimately, the aim would be to give the employees confidence and reassurance to disclose any disabilities without fear that it would be used against them, and that should ideally avoid the need for you to ask. Again, a tribunal would take into consideration that the employer is not medically trained to identify or expected to diagnose a disability. But having said that, they would also consider if the employer was able to demonstrate that there would be no way they could have reasonably known that the employee had that disability. To allow you to evidence this, a good start is that you ideally would have documentation to show the support that you have offered and the questions asked regarding any adjustments that are required. Making use of medical experts such as occupational health may benefit with any suggested reasonable adjustments, and simply asking these to the employee will certainly help in the absence of an OH provider. Simply asking the employee if they need any support is a good starting point for any HR matter.
Excellent, Kelly. Thank you very much for that one. So I'm going to move on to the next one there. So Denise, you referenced short-term sickness earlier and the importance of following processes. We have some managers who are apprehensive managing sickness and triggers. Are there any recommended templates that you can provide to support in this process?
Yeah, so if you are a Sage user, you'll be able to find all the templates that you need on the Knowledge portal, such as return to work templates, scripts for formal meetings, invite and outcome letters. There's also step-by-step flowcharts on there as well to support with the process if you needed to. All the information is on the Sage portal.
Excellent, thank you for that. And another one there is it's about banter again. So we've got some employees who've worked for us for a long time and have a different view on banter and what is acceptable. How do you recommend we address this? It's probably a really tricky one.
Yeah, I'll answer that one. So the biggest indicator on what's acceptable or expected is ensuring that the business culture is a top-down approach. Employees will take the lead from their managers. So clear expectations should be set on behaviours that need to be adhered to and the potential consequence of any inappropriate behaviours that are displayed and/or continue. Equality and diversity training is a great way of helping employees understand how people are different and the benefits of working within a diverse workforce, as well as understanding what discrimination and bullying and harassment may look like and the consequences of this. Finally, ensuring that employees know how to raise any issues and giving everyone confidence that this will be taken seriously and investigated fully as well.
Excellent. Okay, just looking through there for the next one. So a case reference about employees' behaviour resulting from their mental health condition. What should be taken into consideration when someone's behaviour is poor as a result of medical condition? So Denise,
Yeah,
I'll pop
I can
that
take
you.
that one. Yeah, no problem. So firstly, we want to consider the seriousness of the behaviour that's being displayed. If that's not to say if it would be excused in any way, but if they are being short with people, for example, and this is outside of their normal behaviour, could this be dealt with informally in the first instance? For example, having an informal conversation to highlight the behaviour, set out the clear expectations going forward, and offer support such as an OH referral. Where the behaviour is more serious, it may warrant an investigation. It is important that a thorough investigation is carried out prior to any decisions being made on next steps. The investigation should consider the underlying health condition or the diagnosis in terms of what treatment they're receiving, if any. An OH referral should be carried out to understand any reasonable adjustments you would need to consider, as well as asking the employee to for their input into the support and how they feel and what they feel that is needed. If the medical condition amounts to a disability under the Equality Act 2010, the employee could have a case for unfair dismissal and disability discrimination. There is also the potential for failure to make reasonable adjustments if you are aware of the medical condition and don't consider any adjustments or put anything in place that would be supporting the employee. Should a case result in an ET claim, the onus would be on you to demonstrate that you have exhausted all the options before dismissing the employee. So it's never really appropriate to ignore it does need to be managed. Therefore, our advice would be to contact the advice line when dealing with kind of complex ER cases for further support, so we can talk it through and just make sure you've got the advice and guidance and support you need.
Perfect. Okay, so I think we'll need to leave the questions there. There are still a few outstanding, so like I say, we will follow up with those after today's session. But we do hope that you found today's session really valuable. Kelly and Denise, thank you so much for your insight and, as I say, your experience and the guidance that you've offered today. Okay, so we'll just move back to the slides there. So first of all, just want to say that we we've got you covered. Okay, so if you'd like our help with anything that we've covered today, please feel free to check out any of the topics covered in our Sage HR Advice portal. Or if you're a professional or premium customer, don't hesitate to call the advice line where one of the consultants will be happy to provide any guidance on the topics that we've covered today. Moving on, just to let you know, Sage HR Advice is here to help you navigate and simplify HR scenarios, especially with changing legislation. Alongside HR, you can automate and simplify tasks like calculating holiday entitlement, arrange shift scheduling based on people's contracted hours, and automatically log hours work. We do actually do some recorded webinars on these sessions and on some of the modules of Sage HR. So if you're interested in knowing more about them too, you can find links on our webinar pages. In addition, that does link into some of the questions we had prior to today's session. We did have some around the usage of the Sage HR software. More guidance is available on the knowledge base, but again, we are doing HR specific webinars which show you features of the HR software. So please do check out those topics that are available there too. So in terms of HR advice, we've got some amazing new offerings in HR advice, including small business toolkits. We've got a digital e-learn library, and this gets regularly updated with new content and some additional services like on-site health and safety assessments. These are some fantastic offerings to your business, and I would highly recommend getting some more information if that sounds like something you'd benefit from. So with that in mind, I am just going to launch a poll now, and this is just to see if you would like more information on anything that we have discussed today. So this will reach your screens in just a few seconds' time. And what we're just asking there is if you would like more information on Sage HR Advice or on our Sage HR software. So please do pop a tick in the box if you're interested in hearing a little bit more. Don't worry if you're not interested, that's absolutely fine. You can leave the poll alone there. What will happen is if you do express your interest, one of our team will follow up with you shortly after today's session to discuss this fantastic opportunity there. Okay, so just give that a moment or two just to go through there. And just starting to get a few votes there. There is a slight delay, so I do just like to let them come through there. I will just briefly, while that poll is still open, just talk about the upcoming webinars that we've got. So it is payroll year-end season. So if you do find yourself in the position where you are running payroll year-end, our sessions are available to register for now. So I'm just going to close the poll just so you can see. I'm just going to go back to the slides. There we go. So payroll year-end sessions 1 and 2 are available now. You can get yourself registered for those. We're running those across multiple dates, and we've got some additional sessions this year covering Directors National Insurance, corrections at year-end, P60s, and also starters and leavers, which are new sessions we haven't done before over the payroll year-end period. Our next Advisor Plus webinar is coming on the 29th of April. Okay, and we're going to be looking at redundancy, to-pay and restructure and navigating business cost challenges, which is something I'm sure lots of you are considering at the moment in terms of national insurance changes, etc., and the cost to your business. So if that's something you think you'd be interested in learning a little bit more about, then please do get yourself registered for that. It's coming at the end of April there. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of today's session. Like I say, any outstanding questions will be followed up shortly after today. But I just do want to say thank you again to Kelly and Denise there. So thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us today. So we hopefully will see you again on another session really soon. But bye for now. Take care everyone, and we'll see you on another session soon.